We're at Bedrock Vineyard today in Block 2 and 3. This is another one of our new developments. It's in a slightly different stage than Block 7. This is what would be called second leaf. We're in the trunk training phase. But back to this is Sauvignon Blanc, which having trellis and a white variety is relatively new for Bedrock Wine Company. And we decided to plant Sauvignon Blanc here mainly because we want in-house Sauvignon Blanc for the winery, but also we're on the Huachica loam, which is a little more like higher capacity soils, which we think just kind of bodes a little more well for white varieties. Though, as you can see, there's a lot of cobbles in this like iteration of the Huachica loam. So there is a lot of variety within that soil series, but it's still higher capacity than like the Tuscan cobbly we saw in Block 7, where we're dealing more with red varieties.
We decided to experiment in this block and plant half of it to 2 different rootstocks. So there are new rootstocks available from Dr. Andy Walker that are fully nematode resistant, but they are a bit better than some of the nematode resistant varieties that we've had in the past, some of which weren't fully phylloxera resistant and were also incredibly vigorous. So in here we're trying these rootstocks. This is again planted on a site that has been in continuous farming for a long time, so we deal with nematodes, and these rootstocks will allow us to have a vine that's resistant to these nematodes, so we don't have to worry, not that we would treat, but that we don't have to think about treating, or the idea of planting a vine that's just tolerant of pests is something that's attractive to us, because then you're starting from a position where you know you won't have problems moving forward. The clone of Sauvignon Blanc that's being used in here is it's a Musqué clone, which has, compared to kind of a typical Sauvignon Blanc clone, the Musqué clones are a lot more fruity, tropical or melony sort of characters, rather than the greener characters of typical Sauvignon Blanc. And that's just a profile that we really like. And when we've searched out vineyards to buy fruit from, we've searched out Musqué clone of Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, we're doing a different type of trellis here. It's going to be cane pruned, but it's also going to be on a type of quad, so it'll have 4 canes being laid down. And from a grape growing and a winery standpoint, the idea was to get a lot of different sun exposures. Sauvignon Blanc reacts uniquely to sunlight, where it gets a lot more of that riper characters, but having basically 2 sides of the canopy, you can get that riper quality, but you can also have stuff that's shaded, so you have the balance of the green and the ripe, which Morgan really likes when making Sauvignon Blanc.
It's a little different, or a lot different than most red varieties, where you're trying to get even ripeness throughout the vine and throughout the canopy, which is a huge strength of the head trained vines. But in here and in some white varieties, we don't mind having varying degrees of ripeness and fruit expression on a vine, because we feel it adds complexity, and we're not so much worried about the underripe tannins or the acid that you would have in a red wine that would be detrimental. Last year, these vines were grown as bench grafts, and at pruning, they were pruned to 2 bud spurs, so just 2 buds were left on the vine, from which these 2 shoots have grown. And now that the root system has developed, these shoots have quite a bit of girth to them, so they're ready to be trained up as trunks. So what'll happen is, once these are pruned, these will get tied to the stake, and a bit of it will get tied down to the wire just to keep it stabilized, and also to orient our buds up and down the rows, which will help as we build out our head positions, they'll be in a nice even placement across the row. So essentially what you'll have is a trunk, and next year shoots will arise from that trunk. And once that happens, then we have the shoots we need to start building our head, which will include essentially arms that come out, and then from there, those give rise to the canes that will eventually lay down on these wires, which will be our fruiting wires. So next year we'll have a crop, but a small crop. And then after that, we will essentially be up to full production in this block. And the quad is nice because it gives us the ability to deal with a high vigor variety like Sauvignon Blanc, which needs a lot of buds to grow in balance. If you have too few buds, each individual shoot is going to be way too vigorous. So this quad allows us to lay out more buds so that we can have moderately sized shoots, but we're still relatively tightly spaced here. So if we don't have vigor, or as the vineyard ages and becomes less vigorous, we're not going to have a trellis system with a lot of gaps in it, because we can just lay out less canes or whatever we need to do to balance the vigor, and we won't have a lot of gaps in the vine row, which is can be a problem with trellis vineyards.
So right now in the first couple years of the vines, we're completely disking the field just to create a lot less competition for the younger vines in the first couple years. But as they get established, we're going to be switching to a no-till system, most likely using our roller crimper, and maybe including some sort of perennial mow-down grass cover crop. And I think for a vigorous variety like Sauvignon Blanc, I mean, we like using a no-till system for soil health, but I also think that it might help us, maybe help us work with the vigor of the variety as well. Another thing that we're thinking about when we're doing a lot of these redevelopments is, looking towards the future of our vineyards, how our farming practices are going to change. We're working towards doing a lot less hand weeding and eliminating herbicides. So we're putting in these vineyards with the idea that we're using our new undervine implement. So it'll work and clear any weeds that are underneath the vines. It does like a light cultivation. It's called a twister, and it'll bounce in and out and not hit the vines. But with our setup, we have to be very intentional about the height of the vine. We don't want to be hitting any arms. So that's not a problem in this case, but in our future head train vineyards. So it'll run along the ground and bounce in and out of the vines and the stakes. So we're just thinking towards the future of doing a lot less handwork, using this undervine implement, and setting up our vineyards for success in that way.